This morning is the second week of Advent, and as such, it is the second week of our Advent or Christmas series entitled Both and Christmas. Philip Yancey, the great Christian writer of the last 25 years, tells the story of an old, dying Eastern Orthodox priest being interviewed by a friend who also happened to be a journalist. And there in these interviews, as the Orthodox priest is telling his life story, he says the quote up on the screen. His father, the priest's father, was a Christian man. And this priest says about his father that as he reflects back on his life of serving God, now many years old, that he is, quote, so very grateful that my father introduced me, and I love this phrase, to the mysteries of the faith. If you weren't here last Sunday, what we talked about was the place, the essential place of mystery in spiritual truth. That it's important that it's there, that you should not try to eradicate it. And that's key to understand because you and I live in a world that thinks that if something's true, then it has to be 100% comprehensible, or we have to be able to understand it with our human minds in its entirety. And really, my case to you would be that what we yearn for, not just you and me, but what the whole world yearns for, young and old, American and not. Every human being you know yearns for the return of mystery, not its eradication. Our job, and maybe you've thought sometimes your job, wrongly conceived, is to explain everything about Christianity to the people around you or even to yourself. What if that's exactly the opposite of what we're supposed to be doing? What if instead we're supposed to be doing for one another what this old priest said his dad did for him? He introduced me to something beautiful and attractive and worth my life. But it was the mysteries of the faith. I never quite figured it out, but I also, the longer I live, realized I didn't have to. Maybe this is what you yearn for. Maybe this is what I yearn for. Maybe this is what every life around you yearns for too. Something mysterious and bigger than us, the mysteries of the faith. My intent this Christmas season, and this is a series we're doing jointly with the branch, so it's also true for Pastor Chris at the branch, is we want to reintroduce to you the mysteries of this particular season of Christmas. We want to give it back to you and maybe even take away some of the certitude with which we speak about the Christmas season. This morning we're going to talk about one particular part, you could say a chief particular part of the Christmas message that is mysterious to us. And it's lined out very simply in this little verse written by St. Paul in his second letter to the Corinthians, chapter 5, verse 16. These are two different translations of the same verse up on the screen. Though we once regarded Jesus only in a human way, we do so no longer. Eugene Peterson in the Message paraphrase of the Bible says it this way. We looked at the Messiah, Jesus, that way once, like most human beings view each other, and we got it all wrong, as you know. We certainly don't look at him that way anymore. And in that little verse, you gain access to one of the chief mysteries of the Christian Christmas message, what we believe about this season. On the one hand, we believe that Jesus of Nazareth was 100% human. And we celebrate this season that he was born as a human being. And so if you want to imagine what that was like, you need to imagine what it's like to be around a human baby. Some of you are a few years removed from that. Some of you actually have them in your home right now. That means that Jesus needed constant 24/7 care. That means he needed to be fed multiple times a day. It means that the Jesus we celebrate, the Jesus around whom our faith is built, was someone who would have been maladjusted developmentally if Mary and Joseph had not hugged and kissed him, because we know that about human development. At some point around the 12-month mark, there in their little home in Nazareth, Mary and Joseph sat maybe a couple of feet, 4 feet, 5 feet apart, and their little chubby, fat, stubby Jesus tottered between the two of them, taking his first steps. This is what you believe about Jesus. He was fully 100% human. And what Paul says in that little verse in 2 Corinthians chapter 5 is, for a lot of human beings, it never gets past that. This is what you think about him, and it's all that you think about him. But Paul says at some point for him and for all Christians, something else emerges. You can even watch this in the first few centuries of church history as the church wrestles with who Jesus was and what exactly he was. Christians also believe he was 100% divine. That symbol in the top right of the screen is called a triquetra. It's the symbol of the Trinity. That one person, the Son of the eternal Godhead, Father, Son, and Spirit, at one time in one place, came to earth as a human being. This is what Paul came to believe about the Jesus of Christmas. This is how Paul himself expresses that belief in Colossians chapter 1, beginning in verse 15. He, Jesus, is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn of all creation. For by him all things were created, both in heaven and on earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or dominions or rulers or authorities, all things have been created through him and for him. He is before all things, and in him all things hold together. He is the head of the body of the church, and he is the beginning, the firstborn from the dead, so that in him and through him he will come to have first place in all things. This is what Paul believed about Jesus, that he was fully divine at the same time as being fully human. So up there on the screen in those two images, what you have is one of the central mysteries of the Christmas season, a Jesus who is both God and man. There's a theologian who teaches at Princeton named Dan Migliore, who says that this is one of the things that for much of church history Christians have debated and quarreled and argued about. And really one of the reasons that's true, he says, is because we lack the language, the actual language to express the mystery defined here. There's another theologian, an Anglican guy named Mark McIntosh, who says some people look at this and say something like, well, this defies logic. If something is a circle, then it can't be a square. So how can it be true that if Jesus was a man, then he was God? And what Mark McIntosh says is you're using terms that are far too similar. A square and a circle are both geometric objects that you can write on a page. If you wanted to get this opposition, this pairing, this mysterious pairing right, you would say something like, well, if it's a circle, then it can't be an orange. Or, if it's a chimpanzee, it can't be my son. Or in my case, it could be. And my son's not in here, but he would find that hilarious. You get me? These are not just like pairs. It's God and it's man, and they are completely dissimilar. And how can Jesus be both things at one time? What I want to do this morning is expand that mystery for you and make it a little deeper and more profound and maybe awe-inspiring, and then maybe help you wrap your head around it a little bit and see that it's not that different from something you yourself experience. So here's the deepening of the mystery part. We don't just believe that Jesus was 100% human. Biblically speaking, we believe something about his humanity. He was not just human like you and me. Actually, what he was, and you heard it in Colossians chapter 1, if you were listening to those phrases that Paul lines out, he is the firstborn of God's new creation. He is the restoration of what God always intended human beings to be. So you don't just look at Jesus and see a human being. You see human beings the way that God imagined them to be. All of us know what it feels like to not live up to our potential. All of us know what it feels like to regret not obeying our conscience in an important moment. All of us know what it's like to not be as moral as we wish we could be or as our soul tells us to be. We know that feeling. That was not Jesus. In every moment as a human being, he listened to God's voice and he obeyed it. In every moment as a human being, he was motivated by love toward his neighbors and the others around him. He was exactly what God always intended the human race to be. And he offers us the chance to become that too. He was not just a human being. He was the best of human beings. He was God's aspiration for the human race. But moreover, he was not just a human being. The Gospels tell us, especially the Gospel of John tells us, that what Jesus was is the perfect example to us of what a relationship with God looks like and what it can do in a life. Jesus says repeatedly in the Gospel of John things like this: I only say what the Father tells me to say. I only do what the Father tells me to do. In all of the Gospels, you have it retold to you that in the Garden of Gethsemane, on the night before his death, he kneeled in the face of his own murder and he said, not my will be done, but yours, Father, be done. In Jesus, you don't just see a human being. We don't just believe that he was 100% human. We see and we believe that in him you have modeled a perfect relationship with God. What could it look like for you in your life to have a relationship with the God of all things who has always existed? The God who was the same God to human beings 10,000 years ago, and should the human race survive, it will be the same God who relates to human beings 1,000 years from now. What does that look like in your life? It looks like Jesus and how he related to God the Father in his. He isn't just a human being. He is the example of what a relationship with God looks like. But moreover, if you switch and you start talking about his divinity, we do not just believe that Jesus was divine, that he was 100% God. No, part of the depth of the mystery of this belief about who Jesus was is the kind of God that he shows us. He was not just divine. He showed us a whole new kind of deity. This is how the Apostle Paul, again, reflects on that idea for the church in Philippi in chapter 2 of the letter that he writes to them, beginning in verse 6. He, Jesus, existed in the form of God, and yet he did not regard equality with God to be a thing that should be kept or held on to, but instead he emptied himself, taking the form of a servant, being made in the likeness of a man. Being found in the appearance of a man, he humbled himself by becoming obedient to the point of death, even to the point of death on a cross. What did Jesus show you? It's not just that he's God. That is not stating the mystery with enough depth or precision. He is not just God. He is a very different kind of God. Human beings, for all of their history, are deeply religious creatures. Always have been. And when we talk about the gods, we all tend to talk about them in the same way. Gods look like very powerful, awesome beings who are extraordinarily different from us. Far stronger, far more powerful, far more willful. If gods want it done, then the gods get it done, and they get their way. Human beings have always talked about God this way. If you and I were ancient Babylonians, we would have talked about God this way. If you and I existed in the Middle Ages, regardless of where we were on the planet, we would have talked about God in those ways. The history of the human race is believing in gods that are powerful, gods who lord it over us, gods who think that the human race are their servants and are there to accomplish their whims and their desires. This is what we've always thought about God. And Paul says, no, see, you don't just believe that Jesus is God, you think he reveals to us who God really is, and that God is really different than what we often say about God. Philippians 2 tells you that the real God, the true God of all things, is a God who didn't think that being God was worth being held on to. And so he emptied himself and he let go of it to take on the form of a servant, to wander around the Middle East some 2,000 years ago as one man to whom most people did not listen, and in great humility gave up his life to begin the revolution that was Christianity. This is the God of all things as he is truly expressed. The God of all things is a God who does not hesitate to take on limitation. The God of all things as he is truly expressed in Jesus is marked by humility and servanthood. There is no other God but that God, Christians believe. Jesus was not just divine. He showed us an extraordinarily different kind of God. I've been talking about the mystery of what Christians call the incarnation now for some 15 minutes. And you probably can say it no better than this quote up on the screen that has been attributed to several people, so I left the name off because I don't know who originally said it. But in Jesus, we see human beings as they were meant to be. And in Jesus, we see God as he truly is. This is the mystery of the incarnation. Incarnation meaning God come in human flesh. And if I've done this any justice at all, then I have done what I told you I was going to do 15 minutes ago, which is this should seem like a head scratcher. And maybe you feel like you understand it a little less than you did when I started. I suppose there you have my pastoral life summed up in a nutshell. People listen to me and they understand things less, not more. But that is my goal. I told you. I want to return the mystery of what we believe to you. Because our problem is we try to get rid of it or eradicate it, and it's not what we need, and it's not what the world around us need. So here we're left, 15 minutes into the sermon, scratching our head going, I don't get it. I may have been a Christian all my life for whatever reason. I was raised in a Christian home, I went to church as a teen, and I have accepted this as my life. But I got to admit, I don't get this. What do I do now? How can I possibly believe in the full humanity and deity of Jesus, even as I have laid it out for you in the last 15 minutes, if I cannot even begin to scratch the surface on understanding it? Now, it may surprise you when I say to you, in my life as a Christian person, I have never really struggled with doubting this particular part of the Christian faith. And you think, okay, why is that a surprise? Well, for those who don't know me that well, I've doubted pretty much all of the Christian faith at some point in my life. All the different pieces of it at different junctures in my own faith. And this part I never really have. And that makes it surprising to me, and it should be to you too. And the question becomes, well, why? Why has this never been anything that you really wrestled with or doubted or felt like you couldn't believe any longer? And that's because wise people that I've read and who have counseled me and taught me showed me that there is an analogy, a comparison between what you believe and I believe about Jesus being fully man and fully God in some mysterious blend or merging, and what you and I experience in our own spiritual lives all the time. It's not the same thing, but it's close enough that I can accept the blurring of the lines that is extraordinarily incomprehensible when we look at it. To help you do that, or maybe to see things the way that I was taught it and that was so helpful for me, start here. I want you to remember a time in your spiritual life, in your life as a Christian person, when you needed to exercise, or you did exercise, really courageous faith. Or maybe it was a moment when you expressed or put into action really bold, brave love. Or it was a situation in which you expressed or enacted to somebody really unusual, superlative grace or generosity. You fill in the blank, but you're getting the idea, right? So let's go with the first one. It's a moment where you expressed or you put into action courageous, extraordinary, really surreal faith. Maybe you were facing a situation in your life where you could not see past tomorrow, and you did not know how this was going to work out. And anxiety was eating you up from the inside out. And your body was beginning to take on the physical signs or symptoms of carrying around all the anxiety, and your hands shook a little bit involuntarily. Maybe you couldn't sleep at night. You're having a hard time eating. Your stomach was always upset. Your doctor said you're on the verge of getting an ulcer. Maybe your career was in the balance. You didn't know how you were going to pay your mortgage. Everybody in the room, if you've lived long enough as a Christian, has been in a situation where you faced something like this. You were Moses with the children of Israel on the edge of the Red Sea, and the Egyptian army's coming, and there is no way through. You're Joshua with the Israelite people on the edge of the promised land, and you've got to get through or get by a walled, armed city with a group of former slaves, no trained soldiers in your midst. What on earth are you going to do? You're Elijah on Mount Carmel, facing the odds of all these false prophets of another religion standing there humiliating you and your God in that moment where it is you and only you. What do you do? Like I said, there's not a life in the room, just like in the Bible, who at some point hasn't faced that. Now here's my question to you. In that moment, what was that process like for you? In that moment where you had to decide about whether or not you were going to act in courageous faith, what was that process like? How did it start? How did you respond? At some point, did you respond to a prompting that you felt? Okay. Let me ask it to you this way. Where were you in that choice to exercise courageous faith? And where was God in that choice? Now ponder that, and I want to show you these verses. And there could be many more passages that I could use, but I'm going to use these from the opening of 2 Peter. Chapter 1, verses 3 and 5. We're going to focus on the first phrase and the last phrase. Peter says to the church in Rome, God's divine power has given us everything needed for life and godliness. So apparently, according to Peter, all the things that God intended for a human life, all the good things and the moral things and the right things and the loving things that God wanted for human life, these things require God's power. Not yours in isolation, but God's power in order to happen. You see that? If that's not mysterious enough to you, the last phrase ought to be, because it's been baffling Christian thinkers, the best of them, for 20 centuries. In the last phrase, we are told that God did this so that we might escape from the corruption that is in the world because of its warped desires. Okay, that's comprehensible enough, but what about this? So that God wanted to save us from the normal way of thinking and living that is warped and corrupt out there in the world around us, and he wanted to do that so that, the quote is, we may become real participants in God's own nature. No, that's not a bad translation. That is really what it says. And what on earth does that mean? That somehow as human beings we can be saved out of the world and what's normal and become participants, the quote is, in God's very nature. Whoa. I'm not even sure I can explain that to you. I do know that Paul says that in order for me to express God's presence in my life, or when I choose to lean on him and depend on him and give my life to him, God's Spirit shows up in my life in some predictable ways called the fruit of the Spirit. It shows up in ways like love and faith and patience and self-control. So I get the first phrase that we looked at. It takes God in my life, not just me in isolation, for those things to begin to happen. But that next phrase, wow, that even seems to take it a step further. That somehow as God pulls us step by step out of the world, we are entering into his own reality. We are fused together with him as he lives across the face of the globe. We become one with him, partnered with him. I'm not sure how to express to you what that last phrase means, and I want you to know I'm okay with that. Because I'm not trying to take away the mystery. I'm trying to state the mystery. Because it's extraordinary. And it's beautiful. Here in part is what's going on in these verses. Here in part is what's going on every time you choose to step out in love. Every time you choose the way of hard faith. Every time you choose to be a person of patience and gentleness and self-control. It is this quote written by a leading Catholic thinker and writer of our day and time named Ronald Rollhauser. He writes that the incarnation began with Jesus. That is, the coming together of God and man started with Jesus. We've been talking about that this morning. But here's the thing that Christians have to realize. It's never ceased. The incarnation began with Jesus, and it has never stopped. God continues to take on flesh so that every home becomes a church, and every child becomes the Christ child, and all food and drink become a sacrament. God's many faces are now everywhere in flesh, tempered and turned down, so that our human eyes can see him. My point to you is just this. What we believe about Jesus is singular. No one has ever been like him. No one ever will be like him again. He was fully God and fully human in a way that we've never seen before and never will again. However, I understand that it's hard to define and the lines get blurred and it's hard to know where God stops and his humanity starts. But you've experienced the same thing in your own life, and you will continue to. In fact, the more you choose to walk with God and depend on God and lean on God and ask Him for His power in your life to live His way toward the people around you, the more you will begin to experience a similar kind of thing. You're going to see the lines between God and you blurred. And you're not going to know sometimes where one starts and the other stops. In that moment of great courageous faith, when you acted in a certain way, can you rightly figure out where God started and you stopped, or you started and He stopped? Can you rightly discern His role in it and your role in it? Or is it a beautiful blending together of both of you working in a way that when you try to pull it apart, you can't? I'm going to suggest to you that every act of love, every act of generosity, every act of patience in your life works this way. It is you and God in concert. It is you and God in harmony. It is you and God blending your two voices together and making it one. What you see in Jesus is, yes, different from what you and I will experience, but it is also the same. And I hope that you find the mystery of Christmas so captivating that it opens your eyes to the mystery of your experience. And when you invite God into your life, all of a sudden you realize, wow, I now don't just have a partner, there's another person here. And sometimes, the best times, I lose track of who's telling who what to do, or where my motivation for doing what's best toward the people around me comes from. And that's how God always intended it to be. C.S. Lewis said it this way, very simply. God sent Christ into the world to make us all little Christs. And this morning what you see is, yeah, that's really true in a way maybe that you never thought about before. That you as a full human being, you as 100% human, have the chance to live in some small way like Jesus himself lived. Partnered up 100% with the God of all things. And the more you do it and the longer you do it, you kind of lose track of who's motivating whom and where the prompting comes from to do good and right to those around you. What you see in the incarnation of Jesus is your future, if you choose it. To lean on God and listen to Him in the same way that you see in Jesus himself. Would you pause this morning here at the end of the message? And I'll give you a moment maybe to just appreciate the mysterious wonder of the person of Jesus, who we as Christians believe to be 100% God and 100% human. But maybe what God's prompting you to realize is, wow, you can have a life where the lines between you and God get pretty blurred too. And you can have Him be the one who is prompting you and moving you and shaping you in ways that you don't even fully comprehend if you're just willing to open your life to Him in that way. Let me give you a minute in the quiet to pray as God moves you to pray, and then I'll pray for us all.